It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can get a hold of me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you reach out to me through my email, oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Now, if you like our show, be sure and check out our Patreon, the Opperman Report Patreon. Everything here Monday to Friday on AM/FM radio you could find over at Patreon with all the ads and the commercials cut out. Otherwise, every Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 hours of brand new podcast content. And if you go to our archives at Spreaker.com or Spotify, Apple Plays, you'll guess today, Jeremy Kuzmarov has been on our show several times. He's the editor over at CovertActionMagazine.com. We've had tons of the authors of articles, columnists on that magazine on our show over the years. Always great content. He's showing up with a new book, and this guy's a very prolific writer. New book, Political Assassinations in America, The Intricate Nexus of Deep State Crime. Mr. Kuzmarov, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks so much for having me on again.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. What have you been up to besides the book?
Well, just keeping busy, trying to cover all the insanity out there and writing articles for the Covert Action. And I do some part-time teaching, so it keeps me busy.
Yeah, I hear you, man. And also, you got the Substack, right? What is this? Too Hot for the Mainstream, right? What are we going to find over there?
Correct, yeah. Well, I post a lot of my articles there, some of the Covert Action articles and a few other ones. So, and yeah, stuff that you won't find in the mainstream media.
And are you still looking for a columnist over at the Covert Action?
Yeah, we could always use new writers, definitely.
Yeah, I saw an article over there by John Potash, one of our... this guy's been around our show here for like 12, 14 years, you know. It's great to see so many, crossovers, with the guests and the columnists over at Covert Action. Okay.
Yeah, Potash is a great guy. Yeah, he's done some really good research on, like, the CIA and the, 60s rock and roll, these strange deaths of rock and roll musicians. And I think he did one on the Kurt Cobain killing for us, and he's an innovative researcher.
Oh yeah, fascinating the amount of detail, and he always. In fact, he interviewed me for that the Kurt Cobain book. But the thing is, an article, but he has to cut everything down. He's got so much material. He could write a book on each one. John Potash, check him out at Covert Action Magazine. Okay, political assassinations in America. Now, I was reading the blurb on this, the description on Amazon, and there's a lot more. You know what I mean? Like everyone's remembers the big ones like Kennedy and stuff, but there's a lot more than people realize, right? Is that what you discovered too?
Absolutely, yeah. And I go back to Abraham Lincoln, yeah, and we have a lot of continuity, including in the cover-up and how they try and kind of frame it as this lone deranged gunman. I mean, even in the Lincoln case, they tried to present Booth as this kind of, deranged gunman who just, had this hatred for Lincoln. But really, if you look into that, I mean, there was really a wide network that he was associated with. And there are a lot of question marks. There's actually strong evidence that he may have gotten away, because the official narrative has him being shot in a Garrett farm after he was tracked down, but there's actually evidence that was not him who was shot, and that there were people helping him to escape, and that he lived under a pseudonym and may have died actually in Oklahoma in 1903. So that's what I found. Yeah, and researching a lot of different assassinations, including going back, because I looked into like Huey Long, and it's that there's always a cover story that it's this one deranged guy, but really these are often, political acts, political conspiracies, and I think it gets at the heart of American exceptionalism, because I think the ruling elite in America want to create this narrative of America as this great democracy, so they don't want to admit that there's coups and assassinations like in other countries, and rivalries and greed and stuff out of Shakespeare stories. They don't want to admit it because it punctures this narrative of how America is this pure democracy with this mission to export democracy around the world.
And I guess they want to promote stability, too, for the stock market and things like that, right?
Well, that's true, yeah. I would say that's another reason.
That's a huge concern, right? The bottom line is $1. Now, what about people, it seems like today, like there's so many podcasters out there, TikTok conspiracy guys out there, like it's like we're flooded. And the knee-jerk reaction to all this is, well, it's the CIA. But clearly, Lincoln wasn't CIA. That couldn't even be possible. So who is? Is there a thread throughout all these coups and changes, or is it going back and forth?
Well, some I think are just political rivalries. Some I think it's a class dimension. Because one of the chapters addresses the assassination of Huey Long in 1935, and he was a real populist firebrand and real leftist who was promoting a share the wealth program. He had gone after the Standard Oil Corporation in the state of Louisiana, where he's still the most popular politician in the state's history. And he really did a lot for the people, and he was really challenging the big corporations and the wealthy in the state. And he was planning, he got elected to the U.S. Senate, and he was planning to run for president, challenge Franklin Roosevelt from the left in 1936, and that's when he was assassinated in a coordinated elite plot. So, there is a class dimension that some of the victims are, like Long, a leftist who was challenging the power structure, the money elite. And then you have like journalists. Some of the chapters go into some journalists like Danny Castellaro, discussed a lot on this show, and he was really exposing serious corruption at high levels. So there's that too. So, but some I found to be more like political. Even the Kennedy, the take I developed on the Kennedy assassination, is that a lot of it had to do with rivalry with Lyndon Johnson. That there's evidence that Johnson was a key mastermind, and his Texas oil cronies, using some renegade CIA people, mafia, to do the dirty work on the ground. They're coordinated by Johnson and the Texas oil barons, mainly as a political rivalry, because Kennedy was going to drop Johnson from the ticket in the '64 election. And he was going to, and actually Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General, had a thick file on Johnson and a lot of the corrupt things he had done going back in Texas, back to the 1940s, because Johnson, when he won the U.S. Senate in Texas in 1948, he had to steal some ballots. It was rigged in some East Texas counties, and then there were some mysterious deaths to cover that up. And then there were also mysterious deaths related to this guy, Billy Sol Estes, who was Johnson's top financial bagman in Texas. And there was even a federal agricultural employee, Henry Marshall, who got murdered. And Johnson and Estes appeared to be behind that because they were exposing corrupt deals with Estes and also involving Lyndon Johnson. And Kennedy had a file on, and he was leaking it to Life magazine. There was going to be a big expose coming out that would have ruined Johnson, not ruined his political career. And it was a prelude to the Kennedys dropping, Johnson. And he was probably going to go to prison once this stuff was exposed in the media. Then the police would be coming after him. So he had to act for that reason. And that the article was never published because it was circumvented by the JFK assassination. So, that's the take I developed on the Kennedy assassination. And it actually goes in line with my research into Kennedy's. I don't think Kennedy was, some people create this kind of impression of Kennedy as this like great peace figure and progressive, but I think there's strong evidence that in some areas I think they're right. He was making some changes in approach after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and there were some overtures to détente that I think so-called deep states and like. But on the other hand, I think Kennedy was not all that progressive. He was quite zealous in his support for counterinsurgency and anti-guerrilla operations and traditional capitalist policies and kind of imperialistic manipulation in Latin America and stuff. So I don't see Kennedy as that progressive. But I think, it had a lot to do with a political rivalry. And some other cases I found that was probably true as well. So, but I think the ruling elite still doesn't want that narrative to get out, because that's like something you think of more in a banana republic. You have these powerful families vying for power, and one might kill the other. And that's not supposed to be the way the American system functions. So I think that's why they keep that under wraps, as well as the cases where the CIA may have been involved.
It's funny, you talk about LBJ stealing that election. There's actually a famous photograph of them all posing around that election box, the ballot box.
Mm-hmm.
The ballot box with the number right on it, making no attempt to hide their corruption. Just, oh my gosh, it's mind-blowing. I forgot what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, and I think everybody in Texas knew it. I was doing an article on John Stockwell, because he just died, a CIA whistleblower, and so I reread his book, In Search of Enemies, which is kind of whistleblower book about the CIA, and because he was from Texas, and he actually discussed that a bit. He was discussing his formative years, and he was actually initially quite conservative politically. But he said, everybody knew in Texas how corrupt Johnson was, that he stole that election, and he had a bit about that. So,
yeah, and then it seems to like a lot of the local reporters, like even like McNeil, Lear, and I forget the other one too. They all were elevated. Mike Wallace, I think, came out of there too. Like they were all elevated and came out of Dallas there to make a national.
That's true.
Career.
Dan Rather,
Dan Rather's the
one. And some of the ones who covered up the JFK assassination got promoted. Yeah, and there were some good hard scrabble Texas reporter like Penn Jones, who was a local reporter, and he was very suspicious. He was I think Midland, Texas, and he ran the local newspaper, and he became known as a conspiracy theorist. But he had done some good local reporting on corruption. And then he wrote a book about the Kennedys. He was one of the early skeptics of the Warren Report. And, his stuff kind of ages well, whereas these other guys were part of a cover-up operation, but they got, they became national celebrities, like Dan Rather.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how much of the book, this new book here, Political Assassinations in America, how much of it does cover the Kennedy assassination? It is the biggest one everybody's most fascinated with.
Yeah. Well, it's one chapter. I mean, I'm showing the pattern. I guess what's unique about this book is there are a lot of books about individual assassinations, and exposing the truth behind it, or puncturing the official narrative. But this book is unique in that it points to a systemic pattern and a huge number of assassinations that may not be known to most people. Yeah. That these assassinations occur so frequently. I go into, and some are, the book covers some that are better known than others, like Huey Long or like Warren Harding. Very few people know that Warren Harding was probably assassinated by his own wife to save him from being implicated in the Teapot Dome scandal. Yeah, because that was one of the worst scandals in American political history, the Teapot Dome scandal, 1924, which involved, the selling of bribery and the selling of federal lands to oil companies so they could drill for oil. And there was all a huge array of corruption, because Harding was very close with the Standard. He came from the state of Ohio, which is the headquarters of the Standard Oil Company. And a lot of his associates had, worked with the Standard Oil Company, and were kind of shady, people of criminal proclivity or shady background. And he brought all of them to Washington. They were known as the Ohio Gang, and they said that everything was for sale. I mean, I guess it's kind of what we have now with Trump. It was like that, I think, with Clinton too. But everything in Washington was for sale, and it was just an orgy of profiteering and corruption. And Harding was, among the worst administrations for all that. And it was known as the Ohio gang, and yeah, they were involved in an array of corruption, and that was coming to light with the Teapot Dome scandal. And there were a lot of mysterious deaths, including this guy Jeff Smith, who was the assistant to the Attorney General Harry Doherty, and he was found dead. And they claimed it was suicide, but he was shot, on the opposite side. I forget if he was left or right-handed, and he was shot on the opposite side, so everybody knew it wasn't really a suicide. And that was also prohibition. Some of the corruption related to prohibition, and there were also like stuff with sex scandal and like a kind of what I found in my research was like an Epstein type network in that day, that they were having these parties, and actually it was the editor of the Washington Post rented an apartment, and they were bringing in prostitutes, and probably they were underage, and having these parties, and Harding was involved in that, and he was also involved in the legal stock sale. So, and there was a book written by a whistleblower named Gaston Means, and they used to have the slogan, "Who spilled the beans?" Gaston Means. He's a former FBI guy and a private investigator, and he wrote a book, The Strange Death of President Harding, that accused Florence Harding of poisoning Warren. And it was actually corroborated by people who worked at the hotel, because Warren, he was developing an illness, but that may have been used as a cover, and Means suggested that Florence poisoned him and put poison in his drink. And somebody who worked at a staff at the hotel came in the room and noticed a foul smell from the drink and tried to take the glass. And Florence, after Warren was found dead, and Florence held her hand away, took the glass and smashed it and destroyed all the evidence. So it was pretty suspicious. So. And then, she died a year later. She went back to Ohio and destroyed. They saw her burning, and her chimney was filled with smoke, and she was burning all his documents. And then she died mysteriously, 1 year after his death. So there's a pattern of well before the Kennedy assassination that there's a lot of bad things that go on in Washington.
Yeah, and these are great stories. Yeah, you think they would be more popular, before Jeremy Kuzmarov comes along, You think more people would be right?
So that one should be made as a movie. If this book gets picked up by anyone in Hollywood, and maybe, since it happened 100 years ago, it's not as controversial or politically charged as some of these more recent stuff. So I think that they could make a great film, because they say the Florence Harding character, that she was this really powerful, she controlled Warren, she was older than him, and she was always looking after him, and she followed his every move. She was this domineering woman, kind of like a Nurse Ratched. If you've seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, is a great movie. Yeah. She's like a Nurse Ratched type figure, so they could get a great actress to play her. And to play out this scenario, I think would make for a great movie, but it wouldn't be fiction. Yeah, it would actually be true to life.
So let me ask you something, because we had only been talking about 10 minutes, and you mentioned Standard Oil twice. Okay, Standard Oil was involved in more than one assassination. So now, is it always the rich and the powerful assassinating upcoming leftists and populists, or are there occasions when leftists are assassinating their way into power? Probably nothing, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. Yeah, and probably my book, as much as it attempts to be more comprehensive, it's probably only the tip of the iceberg. There are probably a lot of incidents we don't know about. But yeah, I mean, even there are suspicious deaths, related to that. I don't go into in as much depth because I couldn't find that much information. But the death of William McKinley is rather suspicious. And he wasn't particularly progressive leader. But, you never know. It could be a particular policy that they want changed, or he was succeeded by Theodore Roosevelt, who's more jingoistic. And from what I read, maybe McKinley was challenging banking interests in certain ways. But his death could be looked into because they kept this doctor. He died I think a couple of days after he was shot, and but they kept the best doctor of that era was kept away and not able to operate him. And people said this guy would have saved him. So that makes it look like it was probably deliberate. And then, they blamed an anarchist, but he was actually accused of being a police agent, this anarchist, who was accused of McKinley's assassinations. So that's another one. But so, in some cases, they're not necessarily that progressive or leftist leaders, but that get assassinated, but it may be particular policy. In some way, they're challenging certain interests that would want them removed. So, and in other cases, you have some of the chapters deal with government insiders who get killed, like James Forrestal, the first defense secretary, and he was, after World War II in the Cold War, and he was no progressive at all, but he was a zealous Cold Warrior. But he ended up clearly being assassinated. They tried to make because he was confined into a mental facility in Bethesda, Maryland, but he was scheduled to be released the next day. And his brother had visited him and said, he's very happy about the future. He's very looking forward to career in business, and he was going to start a magazine, like an American version of The Economist. But he was also planning to publish his memoir and his diaries, and there was some incriminating stuff he knew about that he was going to expose. And then he was murdered. And then when his diaries were published, people who knew him and were close to the situation said it had been completely rewritten. And actually the people that Forrestal hated, the new diary that was published had them praised. He had a rivalry with George C. Marshall. He thought Marshall was very corrupt. And Marshall was corrupt. If you look into the Pearl Harbor incident, that's the reason I think Forrestal may have been killed, because he knew a lot about the cover-up surrounding the Pearl Harbor and how the FDR administration allowed that attack to go forward and frame these Hawaiian naval commanders. And Marshall was the key in that cover-up, and then he was elevated to Secretary of State. And Forrestal was suspicious of him and didn't like him, but somehow the diary that got published had these words of praise for Marshall, and it was written by a ghostwriter named Walter Millis. So that reminds me also of you find these parallels to Vince Foster when he was killed, the President's Chief of Staff. They wrote a suicide note that nobody who knew Foster believed that was a real suicide note. So they tried to frame it as a suicide, and it was praising the Clintons and saying, "Oh, the Clintons did nothing wrong. There are all these scandals coming up."
Such good people.
Yeah, so you find these pattern where they to die. So these are insiders. It's not that they're progressives or leftists,
Right.
but they're insiders who know certain things. And so they made and I don't think Forrestal should have really went insane. They just put him in an insane asylum because they wanted to create this narrative that he went insane, because they were trying to muscle him out of office and discredit and destroy him. So they made he was mad, and they put him in an insane asylum, and then they murdered him. And he was also against the suspicion, that he was against the support for Israel. He was tied with the oil companies. Actually, Henry Wallace said his hands are stained with oil, but he felt if the U.S. supported Israel too much, it would alienate all the other Arab countries, and the U.S. wouldn't be able to access the oil there, have favorable trading relations. So he was kind of weary of U.S. supporting the state of Israel, right at its inception. So that could have been a motive for removing him. So they created this narrative, that he went insane. and then he was murdered. So,
We're talking to
but
Jeremy.
again, oh, go ahead.
No, you were talking to Jeremy Kuzmarov, and the book is Political Assassinations in America, The Intricate Nexus of Deep State Crime. What about, in your book, do you cover the Colby canoe incident?
Yeah, that's one I cover. Yeah, and that's the point I wanted to make, is that, like, in college, American students, either in high school or usually college, if they take course on Soviet Russia, they learn how the Russian devoured their own. And I kind of make the point at the end that, American system is not necessarily, that different from the Soviet Union. I mean, there are cases of devouring our own here. And these are cases like Forrestal, Foster, and Colby is a classic case of that. And I go into that. As you say, with the canoe, because the official story was that he just decided to go for a canoe ride, after dark, and left a half-eaten meal in his kitchen. But everybody who knew Colby said that he was the most meticulous man, and he stuck to kind of regimented schedule. He's not one to alter his plan or just go for a canoe ride late at night, leaving a half-eaten meal. Going for a canoe ride at a time it might be ill-advisable. And then in his case, they found the body mysteriously. They couldn't find his body after he supposedly disappeared after this canoe ride, but then somehow it turned up in the same spot a week later. So it was clear somebody took the body and then brought it back a week later to be found. But in his case, he knew all the dark secrets of the CIA. And also I found out in my research that he had been hired, there's the Franklin scandal. I think you've covered it in your show, in Nebraska. And Colby was actually hired because there's a guy, John DeCamp, who has, I think, worked with Colby in Vietnam. I knew him, and he was a state senator, a state legislator in Nebraska, investigating the corruption in the pedophilia ring. And so Colby was brought in as an investigator and lawyer. And then there was a mysterious plane crash with another private investigator, Cardori, got killed, and Colby was hired to investigate the plane crash, and he had come to the conclusion that it was a sabotage of the airplane, although that wasn't yet publicly disclosed, and that was right before he got killed. So that would breed suspicion that it may not have been, because many felt, it was retribution for him spilling the beans, testifying before the church committee about all the CIA misdeeds. But it seems probable that it may have been because of the Franklin scandal that they got him.
I interviewed exclusive at the time Henry Vinson, who was the D.C. Madam, the male escort guy who they ran all that prostitution ring through his credit card company for his mortuary. They ran all the prostitution through his credit card account for his mortuary, And he told me all kind of the levels that thing went to. All the big news broadcasters and news reporters were in on these parties, and the biggest one he told me was this guy Craig Spence had a Secret Service security detail that traveled with him. These were Secret Service agents when this guy was doing all this blackmailing and prostitution circulating. Just go back and listen to the Henry Vinson story. But back to Colby for a second. I wasn't aware that Colby had a connection to DeCamp. And DeCamp, by the way, too, he was also in the Phoenix program, too. I don't know how much we can rely on him, but I interviewed Colby's son, and he was very convinced that it was a suicide. He thought that his father committed suicide. Did you hear that story, him making that claim? What do you make of that?
I wouldn't buy that. I don't think Colby would kill himself after all those years. He oversaw a lot of deaths himself, but why would he kill himself? He was living pretty well. He had a nice boathouse in Maryland. He enjoyed his activities outside, and with a distinguished career he had, I wouldn't buy that for a second. And the circumstance of his death, why would he stage the death in that way? And how does he explain how the body was only
Well, no, that when you
was
get into the
was
body thing,
missing
I'll tell you an
was
interesting about
missing for a
Colby's son.
week and then turned up a week later? That obviously somebody staged the scene and brought his body back a week later.
I'll tell you an interesting about Colby's son. What he did his homework on me. This guy knew a lot about me. I think he knew a lot more. He did a lot more homework on me than I did on him. It was very interesting interview. I can go back and check that out.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. Well, like father, like son. He's in that line of
Well, he's fascinating.
mentality that
He lived next door
the
to
spy
Nicole.
world.
Yeah, he testified in the O.J. Simpson trial too. Because he lived next door to.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
that guy's been around.
Yeah,
He's like the Forrest Gump, man. He's been around.
yeah. So I saw the movie. It was interesting. Which it was that the one they made a documentary with him.
Um, about the O.J. stuff.
No, but it was about Colby. It was with Colby's son, like
Oh no,
featured
yeah, that's the one. Yeah,
what
he
it was
probably had a
like
part of
for
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
seems
was a
like the
good
rest of the
movie. But
family.
yeah,
The rest of the family was.
but sometimes the family members, they're not always like some of them just kind of don't want to investigate. If it was a murder, they're sometimes like they're I don't know. In some cases, like family members are at the forefront of trying to investigate the crimes, and actually, could be a good source of information because of their investigation. But in other cases, family members kind of just like for psychological reasons, it was too painful for them to dredge up the memory of the death, so they like didn't want to consider that their loved one may have been murdered.
Oh yeah, as a private investigator, criminal defense investigator, when you have to contact someone like that, they lost their son, they lost their husband, and you have to contact them and try and get some information out of them. It's you can just tell, man.
Yeah.
I don't want to get it's a closed door, and there's no
Yeah, for some, it's yeah.
What about what about? I was going to ask you about Gary Webb. What do you make of that? Because people make such a big deal about the 2 gunshot wounds, but then it's like 8% of successful gunshot suicides are multiple gunshot wounds. Did you get into that in your book?
Yeah, to me it was clear that he was murdered. There are people I interviewed who knew him and said it was a murder, who were very close to him, and he was supposed to that week. There was a black group that he was supposed to speak to, and he said he was all excited and this planned event, and he was talking to them about some new information he had uncovered and things he wanted to do. So they were convinced that there's no way he had killed himself. And then the circumstances looked quite odd. And then there is the motive, and there is a pattern. The book goes into several. The Castellaro case. There's also the Dorothy Kilgallen case, where clearly she was murdered. She had interviewed Jack Ruby, and she was a very prominent columnist in her era, and she had a lot about the JFK assassination that she was going to be writing about, and she was writing a book. And she had written a bestseller. She was kind of in that true crime genre, which is always popular. And she had written a true crime because she had covered a lot of famous murder trials in the 1950s, and she wrote a best-selling book about that. So, for her to write a book on the Kennedy assassination, exposing it as a conspiracy was a big deal. And that's why
communications with Jack Ruby that she had notes about that were missing.
Correct.
Yeah. I interviewed that fellow Shaw several times about.
Oh yeah. He's done good research on that.
He's obsessed with that topic. This guy's like a dog.
Yeah, and then there's another writer who came out with a book who exposed that the killer of Kilgallen had ties to the CIA. That he'd worked with the CIA in Guatemala. I forget his name. It's in my chapter, but and he actually wrote some cryptic poems that he published online that basically admitted to his role. Right. And I think now he passed away. It may have been because he was getting older and ill, so he published some stuff online. Richard something, I can't remember his last name, but
Yeah, they had a romantic relationship, I believe, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was like a new relationship. Yeah, and that was his. Yeah, it was part of his con job. Yeah.
And Danny Castellaro, we've talked about that, of course. That was clear. There's no way that you couldn't physically commit suicide after cutting all the tendons in one wrist. So how would you hold the razor blade for the other wrist? It's just and there was blood all over the walls.
Yeah.
Talked about that. So do you cover that too in the book?
Yeah, I cover that. Because they're kind of short chapters that give overview of these cases, and it shows a lot of the parallels. As far as the cover up, and also the pattern is important to establish. That again, it kind of punctured this mythology of American democracy. That if there's a pattern of killing journalists, I mean that's what we think of. Happened in Soviet Russia, or Putin accused of killing journalists. Actually, I've researched that too and found there's no hard evidence to indicate that Putin was behind many of those murders that he's blamed for. So it kind of, my book in a way kind of flips the script, and that we're not necessarily the good guy that we present ourselves. And yeah, there's a lot of evidence, and there has been a lot of good reporting on these issues. Like Gary Shaw, you mentioned, there are a lot of good journalists who've dug into these cases, but they don't usually get much exposure in the mainstream media, unless, I guess, if it's an older case, like after years, maybe there's a bit of a breathing room for some of the truth to come out in a more mainstream environment. But for the most part, the media ridicules independent investigators and journalists, but there are a huge number of books that have been written, exposing. Like, I didn't do that much. I mean, my book is based a lot on the labor of other writers and investigators who investigated these cases and did a really good job, piecing it together. It's just it doesn't penetrate like the mainstream. Although I think more and more are seeing through the phony veneer of American exceptionalism.
Yeah, but what about all these TikTokers out there now, conspiracy theorists, like exposing the truth and all that? It seems to be they're just throwing a lot of mud around, a lot of confusion. It's just making things worse.
That's true, and that's one of the reasons. Yeah, hopefully my book is of value because, like, say the JFK assassination, I see stuff on Facebook, or I scroll my Facebook or on TikTok, as you say, oh, the Israelis, did it, and what's the evidence? Because like I researched that topic quite intensively, and I worked with some experts who helped me navigate to material. And I found no evidence whatsoever of Israeli Mossad involvement in the JFK assassination. And often, they're just spouting stuff with no evidence. So, I mean, it's important to ground your analysis in historical, in facts and evidence. And that's what I try and do in this book to disprove the lone gunman myth. By marshaling a lot of evidence together, but not just spouting ideas without evidence. And now there's this there seems to be this inclination to blame the Israelis for everything bad in American life, and to blame all. I know that the Israelis have gone way overboard in Gaza, and were taken over by extremists, and that's a shame. But we shouldn't blame Israelis for every problem in American life. Like, the problem with our election goes beyond the AIPAC. It has to do with the role of money in politics. I mean, AIPAC is a problem, but there's a much bigger problem that's not, being, at least like these feeds on social media, everything's now about AIPAC. We have to defeat. But what about the bigger problem of corporate influence in politics?
It's Jew. It's right. It's no longer.
It's starting to get a little scary. Yeah, it's starting to sound a bit anti-Semitic. Yeah, because I'm Jewish. So, and that's the point. Yeah, in my book with the assassination, I'm trying to present good hard evidence. Like even the Harding chapter, there is a ton of evidence, like this hotelier kind of confirmed what this guy Gastanin was writing. So there actually is. It's not really conspiracy theory. I mean, there's some pretty strong evidence that indicate that Florence Harding actually pulled this off. And like with the Huey Long case, there's a lot of evidence to implicate a wider conspiracy, and that it was the security guard that killed Long, but they were acting at the behest of these powerful, wealthy interests who in that case wanted, Long was a threat to their wealth. And then the Kennedy case, there's a ton of evidence related to Lyndon Johnson and his role, and on down. So I'm trying to provide good information and good research, often grounded in some pioneering investigations by credible investigators and scholars that unearth a lot of good information to challenge the official story, whether it's Martin Luther King or Kennedy's or all these other ones we're discussing.
What do you make of the attempts on Trump? Nothing successful, but these wild attempts. The butler seems to be staged. That golf course guy had all these connections to these recruiting mercenaries in Ukraine. Like, what's going on? What do you make it easy? They do seem like lone nuts, except for the stage one, I think, but they do seem like lone nuts, some of these things, right?
Well, that's in my final chapter. I addressed that the evidence that would indicate also why they're conspiracy, and that there are certain patterns, like with the Secret Service. The Trump, the first one, you had this guy, Thomas Crooks. How did he get up on the roof and they didn't notice him for all that time? And, a 20-year-old kid can't just pull off something like that. And then they found, connection with him and the FBI and some of the communications he had with foreign countries. So this had the look of something bigger, and that and then the Ryan Ralph. I mentioned that. He was also. I think he's been convicted now in another of the Trump assassination attempts. Yeah, but what was weird about his case was, firstly, he had been in Ukraine, like recruiting mercenaries. Like he had CIA written all over him and MK Ultra, because he had been in Ukraine, he was recruiting mercenaries, he had been in Congo. And then he wrote this book where very few people read his book. I read his book, and it was because he published the book. It was self-published, and it was one of the oddest books I ever read, but it reminded me of actually the Sirhan Sirhan, because it seemed like he was under hypnosis or something, because the book was incoherent, and it presented like this image of him as this anti-Trump guy, peacenik, but then he mixed in CIA talking points. What gave it away for me was he would be talking like in this flowery kind of hippie language, and then he puts in a line out of the blue in his book, but Zelensky had to delay the election, and he doesn't even explain why. It's like a CIA talking point mixed in, because the CIA pushed for was trying to rationalize how Zelensky, kind of their puppet, I guess, has stayed in power all this time, and yet somehow they're fighting for democracy in Ukraine. And so he puts in somehow Zelensky had to delay the election, and then he had a praise for a Peruvian leader, like out of the blue. What was odd about it, that he wasn't even discussing Ukraine, even in the paragraph where he put in this line. And then later in the book, he's like, and again, it's just like peace, like anti, flowery language, and why he's against Trump. And then you have this line like Lena Boulard is a great leader. And I hadn't been following her or the situation in Peru, but when I read that, I looked it up, and she was the leader of Peru, who was a right-wing leader who came in the coup, and she was accused of a genocide, and she, mowing down protesters, and she was regarded as like the least popular leader in the world at that time. That was like a year or two ago, and he was praising her, but he wasn't even discussing Peru in that paragraph. So to me, it had to sign like that somebody put him up to writing this, and that he was probably a MK Ultra, that he was under hypnosis, because that's a thread I found. As much as it sounds like it's a science fiction, the reality is with the MK Ultra that they were training assassins and using hypnosis or setting up patsies like Sirhan Sirhan and directing them And if you read Sirhan's note in the Kennedy case, it was also a lot of incoherent stuff mixed in with some political messaging. And most of Sirhan's friend, though, said he had been apolitical, and he wouldn't even join the SDS. In the 60s, they tried to get him to join SDS, but he was apolitical. But then he produces this weird manifesto mixed in with some flowery, incoherent stuff with some certain CIA type talking point. In that case, they wanted to paint him as hating Kennedy because of his position on Israel-Palestine. So that's in studying this, the big picture, I start to see these parallel. The Ralph book looks like it's a CIA manufactured document that he probably wrote under hypnosis, and that he was an MK Ultra, and he was set up. And I think it's probably, my speculation with these more current stuff, that may be part of a strategy of tension, where they just want to, the so-called deep state wants to manufacture violent incidents or assassination attempts, so they keep the public on edge and fearful of violence, and they can ratchet up police state measures. Or maybe it was the Trump campaign. Trump wants to look like a hero, that he survived an assassination attempt. So maybe his campaign, because they have the money. I mean, all it takes is money, and if they have connection with the intelligence establishment, they could, set up these patsies pretty easily. And Trump has plenty of money, so that could be a motive as well.
Yeah, that Secret Service agent, the one with the sunglasses posing right next to him, became the director of the CIA. So he got a nice little promotion there.
Yeah, so you find those connections. Yeah, when you look into it, is that people in these incidents who cover it up get promoted, and that's how you know they're involved.
There's a picture of him, and he's looking right at the camera, taking a picture. And he's right next to Trump. And
what was this guy's name? Who got promoted?
Dwyer, I think it is. It's the guy who's the CIA director right now. That's the guy. He's the guy standing right next to Trump in the sunglasses, looking right at the camera. And I wrote a meme. Here's the guy, not looking for a gunman. No, he's posing for a camera.
Exactly.
They make him Secret Service.
It seemed like all staged for the movies.
It seemed staged to me. What about the White House Correspondents' Dinner? What's going on? They don't even talk about it anymore. It didn't happen. What happened there?
Yeah. Well, it's hard to keep up with every incident, and that's the point. They keep staging these kind of events, and they've gotten pretty good at it.
They weren't so good at Charlie
they're
Kirk.
messy
Sloppy,
public.
Right?
Yeah.
What do you make of Charlie Kirk?
Yeah.
I think Candace Owens is playing Mutt and Jeff with these characters. I think they're all up to their necks in this stuff. What do you come up with?
Yeah, I mean, I discussed that. I mean, I don't have all the answers to it, but it seems to fit the pattern. I mean, they're setting up this guy Robinson. The evidence just doesn't make sense with the gun. That he disassembled the gun in such a quick time, and and what a comparison you find with Oswald and James Earl Ray is that none of them have any expertise as shooters or any expertise with firearms, and yet they're supposedly pulling off these amazing feats for a sniper. And Robinson never knew nothing about guns. How did he pull off this amazing feat, shooting a guy at a lengthy distance, and then disassembling the rifle so smoothly and so quickly, and getting out of there? And then you have to question. They make his connection with the trans. I mean, it seemed very political. That they're part of their efforts to create animosity toward the trans people. So and they do that. Even the Huey Long, I found they tried to. There's something they're trying to set people up and plant leftist literature because they wanted to make this doctor who they accused of assassinating Huey Long, that he was a socialist. Just like Oswald, they tried to present this image or narrative that Oswald was with the Fair Play for Cuba committee and that he was a Marxist, and that this was part of the Soviet Union or Cubans were behind the Kennedy assassination. So they often try and set them up as leftists, to try and discredit left-wing movements, or in this, so there's a kind of twist in the Charlie Kirk cake with the trans angle. So,
and those text messages between the two of them, like they're like, it's like no one texts like that. Well, you would be there for texting, It's when you're hiding in a bush and you're writing these long texts. It is ridiculous.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, if you're a criminal who's pulling off, like crime of the century, I mean, you got to be pretty, smooth and proficient. You're not just going to be texting and leaving all this incriminating information behind. So yeah, and that's the pattern. Like with the another case I've looked into, the Oklahoma City bombing, and like Timothy McVeigh, his getaway vehicle had no license plate. So I mean, somehow he planned the spectacular terrorist attack, and yet he can't, the getaway vehicle, he's not smart enough to have a getaway vehicle with a license plate, so he knows he'll be caught, I mean, so, and even in the Watergate, I was doing some research on that recently, and that was a setup. I think there's strong evidence of that. And like they left these, receipts in the car, supposedly, break-in artists. They wouldn't leave the receipts. I mean, these are professional criminals and a professional covert operation
at the time. G. Gordon Liddy and Frank Sturgis. These are some of the baddest guys on the planet. Okay.
Yeah, they're not going to leave the receipts behind. They're going to get caught. Yeah. So I mean, they're not stupid. If they can pull off like a major assassination of a political figure, or a bombing of a federal building, or something like Watergate, they're not going to be stupid and leave a receipt.
Sturgis had his own B-25 bomber. They were making his own napalm. Him and his nephew were making their own napalm and dropping it on the president of the Jamaica's palace on a gambling debt. Okay, this guy's going to let some security guard take him down. It's just impossible. I'll never get over that story. These the toughest guys on the planet, and they're Bay of Pigs. These guys, and they're sitting there, and then some security guard is going to get the drop on them.
Yeah. So, unless they wanted to be caught, so I mean, we see that time and again. So, and that's what's amazing is that that in these cover-up and how they brand these investigators conspiracy theorists. When you just look into it for a few minutes, most people, people have ordinary common sense. You see clearly there's something fishy about these official stories. And so many.
Jeremy, somebody would talk. If it was a big secret, somebody would say, hey, it's all right there in front of you. By the way, I just want to point out, too, that Clarity Press is the publisher of this book here, Political Assassinations in America, the Intricate Nexus of Deep State Crime. And they are one of the good publishers out there, putting out good stuff. You were talking about before about how difficult it is to get this kind of information out there. So Clarity Press is a good company to support. Real quick, we got only a couple of minutes. Anna Paulina Luna, who's running these hearings. What do you make of this?
Into the JFK assassination? Or the MK Ultra?
MK Ultra, UFO, she's working on now. She's going into next is RFK with Lisa Peace. Well, what do you make? What's going on?
Well, I wouldn't try. I think like the Trump administration maybe want to create this image that they're, taking on the deep state. And so they staged these hearings, but they're more like, at best, limited hangouts. At worst, there's really nothing. Like the MK Ultra hearing, there was nothing new for anybody who followed the MK Ultra or who's read some of the books. Kinzer wrote he was one of the guests at that hearing, and he wrote an excellent book on Sidney Gottlieb. So, I mean, on one hand, it is good because it just gets it out there, more people are aware of this that may not have been, but I think it's maybe very politicized, and it's at best a limited hangout, and they're not really exposing anything new in any of the cases. Like with the JFK stuff, the documents they released, most of them have nothing to do with the JFK assassination, and then there's already hundreds of books written. And the case is pretty well solved. I mean, there's just enormous evidence that Lyndon Johnson was a key figure, along with other Texas oil barons and renegade CIA. And there are books by insider, like Barr McClellan wrote a book He worked at the law firm that represented Lyndon Johnson, and that's a very important insider's account that points to these Texas elements and Johnson's role in it. So, I mean, so much is already known about the Kennedy assassination, and these hearings are not bringing anything new, and there may be a kind of political agenda. So, but on the other hand, at least it does bring attention to these issues and bring some good information to light.
Yeah, if you go to the Opperman Report Patreon, I have a recording, a telephone recording that Anna Paulina Luna made with a fellow named William Braddock, who's did 3 years in jail, in prison. Well, he's talking on his tape about having access to Russian Ukraine hit squads and $300 billion of Illuminati money and gold. All kinds of wild stuff this guy's saying while she's tape recording this guy. Are you aware of that, Jeremy? I bet you're not, right?
I haven't followed that, no.
I'll send it to you. It's the most funniest thing you ever heard in your life. She's having a conversation with this guy like he's normal. And I guess she's taped him to screw him. But how you would have just imagine someone gets on the phone with you to start talking about Ukrainian hit squads and Illuminati gold for some remote Florida Republican primary. You sit there with a straight face. I don't know how you could pull that off. But Jeremy, we are out of time. What do you want to leave us with? The political assassinations in America, the intricate nexus of deep state crime. All of Jeremy's books are gold. You want to go back in a warmonger about Clinton, Obama's unending wars, the myth of the addicted army, modern repression, all great books by Jeremy Kuzmarov. And don't forget covertactionmagazine.com. But Jeremy, what do you want to leave us with?
Well, I think this has been a good discussion. Yeah, I think the issues, we're addressing here are very important. Yeah. And I think it's, good to look critically at the American political system. And ultimately, I think we want to, build movements for reform, and also look at U.S. foreign policy, that the guiding narrative of U.S. foreign policy are not credible, really. And we need to adopt more humble world position, or avoid the disaster that we've been living through. So that's another aspect. And hopefully my books, provide good grounded research and could be a good resource for people. And it's important, like we were saying, to have good, credible, and grounded information. When addressing, issues like assassination or what are regarded as conspiracy theories, because then actually it's easy to discredit if somebody's, everybody knows there was some kind of conspiracy, but if you're, saying, oh, the Israelis did it and there's no evidence whatsoever, it's easy to discredit you. So it's good to have good information when you're addressing these issues. So more and more will understand what really happened.
Yeah, it seems like half the people out there are just muddying up the waters, trying to cause confusion and division. But Jeremy Kuzmarov, covertactionmagazine.com, always great content there. And Jeremy also has a Substack, Too Hot for the Mainstream. But it's not too hot for Clarity Press, who came out with his book, Political Assassinations in America, The Intricate Nexus of Deep State Crime. Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on the show. I love having you on. And, you always have an open invitation. Anything you're working on, if you want to promote it, just give me a call.
Okay, I really enjoyed the discussion, as usual.
Okay, Jeremy, thank you so much. Good night.
All right, take care.